Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Rukmini Banerjee, and I am one of your 3 Athenaeum Fellows for the year. Thank you, Professor. We often forget that the Electoral College was a compromise. The founders were divided as to whether the presidency ought to be decided through popular vote or a vote in Congress. Eventually, they settled on the idea of using electors. Each state would have as many electors as it has members of the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. Today, these 538 electors make up the Electoral College, which has the purpose of choosing the president every 4 years. While the Electoral College may have been a sufficient compromise in 1787, it is unclear as to whether that remains true today. Americans are divided on the issue. Some believe that the Electoral College ought to be abolished, while others are adamant it should be preserved. Some of us are set in our positions, but others are far less decided. To either clarify our perspective or maybe even change our mind, we have with us today Ilan Wurman and Aditya Pai, both esteemed legal scholars who are also CMC alum. Yeah, give me a hand for that. Ilan Wurman, class of 2009, is an associate professor at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University, where he teaches administrative and constitutional law. His research is mainly focused on the 14th Amendment, the separation of powers, and constitutionalism. His academic writing has appeared in the Yale Law Journal and the Stanford Law Review, among others. He is also the author of A Debt Against the Living, An Introduction to Originalism, published in 2017, and The Second Founding, An Introduction to the 14th Amendment, published in 2022. Prior to entering academia, Ilan clerked at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit and served as an associate counsel for Tom Cotton's Senate campaign in 2014. Wurman earned his JD from Stanford Law School. This is also his 3rd appearance at the Athenaeum. Aditya Pai, class of 2013, is a trial attorney at Rutan Tucker LP, where he represents owners and general contractors and subcontractors in the construction industry as well as nonprofits. He is an Urban Land Institute Young Leader and serves in an advisory board role at Habitat for Humanity in Orange County, as well as in Dev/Mission, a nonprofit dedicated to providing low-income folks jobs in tech. Prior to entering the law practice, Pai interned for Montana Governor Steve Bullock and U.S. Senate Mark Warner. He earned his JD from Harvard Law School, as well as a master's in political thought and intellectual history from Trinity College. At Harvard, he won HLS's Pro Bono Service Award and wrote over 150 pages of supervised research and writing with Nobel laureate in economics Amartya Sen. At CMC, Pai served as the manager of the Rose Institute of State and Local Government and was the ASCMC student body president. Today, Ilan Wurman and Aditya Pai will attempt to clarify the question, should the Electoral College be abolished? The format of today's Athenaeum will be a little different. Instead of a talk or a panel, it will be a debate, and the debate will occur in a modified Oxford parliamentary style. Nohl Patterson, a class of 2022 alum, will help maintain the structure of the program. At certain junctions, students will be asked to participate by asking questions or answering polls. The first poll is going to be up on the screen shortly. We're going to ask, right here. This poll will be on the screen for about 30 to 45 seconds. As of now, we're going to ask you all to scan the QR code and please vote. Make sure to do so because it's going to be gone from the screen pretty shortly. And eventually, there's going to be other polls like during some parts of the Q&A and after. Today's program is also co-sponsored by the Dreher Roundtable, whose mission is to inspire public service with additional support from the Rose Institute of State and Local Government. Before we get started, a few quick reminders. Please take this time to silence and put away your cell phones. Either then, when it is time to vote in the polls, please make sure that your cell phone is put away. Be present. We have an amazing panel and debate here for you today, so be there to pay attention and ask them questions. As usual, video and audio recording by the audience is strictly prohibited. Per college policy, it is always recommended to wear a mask when not eating or drinking. Welcome to the Athenaeum. Yeah, it'll like
Okay, we'll be loading. Thank you, Rukmini, for that very generous introduction. First, I want to thank Congressman Dreyer, the Dreyer Roundtable, and the Rose Institute for helping to organize this debate. It's a pleasure to be back on campus, and I know that I speak for all three of us when I say this is a very special opportunity for us to gather as a community and debate this very topical question. The question we are debating is, should the Electoral College be abolished? Now, before we begin, I want to outline a few brief rules and structure this debate. This is structured and based off of an Oxford-style debate. Each of our debaters will be given 12 minutes of an opening argument uninterrupted. This will be followed by 7 minutes of closing debate. During this final pyramid, yes, sir.
Mike, is your mic on?
It is.
Great, on that side.
Technical difficulties.
Try it again. That's it. It's off. Why not? Okay, try now.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please. This will be followed by 7 minutes of closing debate. Now, during this final closing period, the first and last minutes will be protected. In the middle 5, each of our debaters will be able to interject, interrupt, and question their opponent. I would like the audience to please look above, as hopefully we'll be seeing results shortly. Fantastic. This worked just as planned. Thank you very much, Priya. It appears that 67% of the audience believes that, yes, we should abolish the Electoral College, giving us an almost 2/3 and 1/3 perfect margin. Now, this seems like, Ilan, you have your work cut out for you. But
he's got his work cut out for him. It's a harder margin to maintain. Right?
And as you can see, I'd finally like the audience to observe that this is actually the second time these two fellows have been to the Ath and debated each other. Over a decade ago as students, they debated on a panel, and so I am jokingly referring to this as a grudge match. So now that we have the results, Mr. Pai, if you'd please take to the podium. Once you're up there and begin, we'll start time.
Hear me okay?
Fantastic.
Thank you, Nohl. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you to the college for having me, Chairman Dreyer, Rose Institute, Professor Fortner, and Priya, and the Athenaeum team for making this event possible. It's an honor to be back. Like so many CMCers, I was a high school debater, and so to be back in a debate is even more meaningful. Here to have fun and maybe provoke a little bit, and entertain, and hope you'll join us in that project. On November 27th, 1963, 5 days after Kennedy was shot dead in Dallas, Lyndon Baines Johnson addressed a joint session of Congress. As Robert Caro recounts, on the eve of the speech, the president's writers were gathered around his dining table. Johnson came down around midnight and asked them, "What have you come up with?" And they said, "Well, Mr. President, the one thing we know for sure is don't touch civil rights. Do not mention civil rights. Because you will antagonize the Southern senators. You will fail to get anything through Congress, and not just civil rights. It's a noble cause, but it's a lost cause. It's a noble cause, but it's a lost cause. Don't fight for it." And Johnson, in this moment, before the bill's subsequent passage is clear, pauses, and he says to his aides, "What the hell is the presidency for, then? What the hell is the presidency for?" I have 3 arguments that together constitute an answer. I'm going to press them again and again on Ilan and everyone else, using them both as a shield and a sword, and invite Ilan to refute them. They go like this. 1, one people, one leader. 2, gov, not pres. 3, primaries, not general. I'm going to repeat that again. 1, one people, one leader. 2, gov, not pres. 3, primaries, not general. One people, one leader goes like this. We should let the people, not the people through the states, pick the president, because as Johnson knew, direct representation of the people, not the states, is what the presidency is all about. One people, one leader. The presidency is about 4 things. One is vibes. I got this from Nohl, actually. In a conversation that we were having about contemporary politics, he said, you know, Pai, politics isn't about policy anymore. It's all about the vibes. And the truth is, it's always been that way, especially for the president. Jimmy Carter gave a very infamous and horrendously bad speech in 1979, known as the malaise speech, in which he actually never used the word malaise. He talked about a crisis of confidence. But it bombed so badly that it actually affected the national mood. And when Ronald Reagan ran against him, with the Statue of Liberty as a backdrop in September of 1980, crisp white shirt, an American flag blowing in the wind, he talked about American renewal. And 4 years later, he was reelected in a landslide because he talked about morning in America. A big part of what it means to be president of the United States is to manage the national mood, to manage the vibes of the country. And it's not just Carter and Reagan. It was so with Buchanan to Lincoln, Hoover to FDR, and I would argue from President Bush to President Obama, as well as President Eisenhower to President Kennedy. This country not only needs a president to galvanize its mood and its mindset, we actually want it. And when we do, we don't think as Californians, we don't think as Texans, we don't think as Pennsylvanians. We think, and more importantly, we feel as Americans. It's all about the vibes. The second reason is that the president is the administrator-in-chief. And if you think about the way administration is done at the federal level in this country, I had the honor of studying with the former director of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, which is an office in the executive branch that scores incoming regulations. And they score it using cost-benefit analysis, which, as any econ student will tell you, is a utilitarian measure that multiplies the impact on one person times the number of people and the scope of that impact, including measures like quality life years. That should be a clue. At no point in those analyses does the head of OIRA or any member of the executive branch consider whether the people impacted by those policies live in California or Texas or Pennsylvania or any state. The federal government is administered for the country, and the president is responsible for doing the same. It therefore makes very little sense to elect the president through a mediated process that goes through the states. It just doesn't make sense. It's not true to the constitutional purpose, and more importantly, as Johnson noted, it's just not what the presidency is for. Third, the president is the legislator-in-chief. Notice that US senators come from states. Members of the House also come from states. The president comes from a state, but actually has a lot less of an incentive, now for the Electoral College, to consider states' rights, states' interests, and states' values. A good example of this actually distorting presidential analysis is the auto bailout. Now, when President Obama bailed out the auto industry, he had a very simple rationale. He said, good policy is good politics. And maybe that's true, but it certainly didn't hurt that two of the most impacted states by that decision, positively impacted, were Ohio and Michigan. And it wasn't entirely a coincidence, I would submit, that President Obama beat the son of a former Michigan governor by 3 points in Ohio and 7 points in Michigan, and Minnesota to boot. I'm not saying that President Obama did this because he wanted to win re-election in the Midwest. I'm just saying he might have. And that alone, the possibility that the president is considering the impacts on states rather than the aggregate impact on the country, I believe, is just not what the presidency is for. Finally, we elect presidents to be commanders-in-chief, to be military leaders. And here there's some troubling statistics. Defense contractors. Over 3/4 of the value of Pentagon prime contracts awarded in the United States go to firms in just 15 states. And that concentration is growing. According to the Defense Department data, the share of total defense contractors in the last 9 years, the value of it, executing these 15 states, grew by 5%. Moreover, the same 15 states that account for such a large share of contract dollars also house over 60% of active military forces stationed inside the United States, and nearly 60% of all Pentagon civilian employees who are not based overseas. States like California, Florida, Texas, and Virginia. And again, I'm not saying this calculus necessarily enters the minds of presidents. I'm just saying that it might, and that it shouldn't. Because the president is not supposed to be looking out for the interests of the states. He's supposed to be looking out for the interests of the American people. There's another example here that I think illustrates this point. Is known in legislative parlance as the Cornhusker kickback. In 2009, David would know this well, Senate Democrats needed all 60 of their votes for the Affordable Care Act to overcome the threat of a Republican filibuster. They needed Nebraska Senator Ben Nelson. He was the last holdout. Nelson raised the matter with Harry Reid, then Majority Leader, who added wording to the bill to exempt Nebraska, and only Nebraska, from paying for the Medicaid aspect of the law. And they got Ben Nelson's vote. That's okay for a senator to do. But I would argue it's just not what the presidency is for. Point number 2, gov, not pres. And this is related to what I just brought up. Now, this is not a point about federalism. This is not a point about devolving power to state and local administration. My argument is that the following people, governors, senators, federal district judges, federal appellate judges, and United States attorneys already bring and reflect state values, state perspectives, and state interests in the federal government. This is really important. This is not a point about state or local or city or county. The federal government already houses perspectives from members of Congress who bring state priorities to bear. In fact, as we saw recently with Governor Abbott, Governor DeSantis taking on Governor Newsom, governors also affect federal law and policy in its administration. Tino Cuellar has a great article about the political economies of immigration law, and in it he talks about the role of state governments, which is counterintuitive, because they actually don't have a ton of authority about the border. But in practice, they have an impact. And so do you really need the president to have an additional perspective coming from the states when you have governors, United States senators, and as I'll share shortly in an example, even members of the House who are thinking about how their states are affected. There's a September 1st article in the New York Times titled, "What the End of the Pelosi Era Could Cost California." It says it all. Californians are worried that losing Nancy Pelosi, even though she'll be replaced if we lose the House by Kevin McCarthy, is going to be bad for the state. And that suggests that states are already represented at the federal level. Finally, and this, I think, if you disagree with everything I've said so far, gives you what's called the golden bridge to nevertheless vote for my side. The Electoral College only applies to the general election. Iowa is still going to help determine who the president is. Another example, in South Carolina, which helped elect President Biden, the Democratic nominee, James Clyburn, a senior member of the House, helped secure a commitment to appoint the first African-American Supreme Court female justice. And without that commitment and without that endorsement, it's very likely that President Biden would not be the Democratic nominee and therefore not President of the United States. So even in the presidency, we don't need the Electoral College to reflect state values. The only thing that's left is the question that Johnson posed when he passed the Civil Rights Act. What's the presidency for? And I would argue the Electoral College is not it.
Mr. Pai, that's time. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me back at CMC for a second year in a row. I'll preface my remarks that I was never a high school debater, or a middle school debater, or a preschool debater, or a college debater. So in some sense, I'm at a disadvantage here, but at least I have truth on my side. And I'd rather have that advantage.
We'll see about that.
I'm here to defend the Electoral College in only 12 minutes, so I'll do it in 3 ways, trying to get as little distracted as possible. First, by defending its origins. Second, by defending some of its practical benefits. And third, by directly addressing and refuting the claim that the Electoral College is undemocratic. But in a way, I have a fourth argument, which is that everything I'm about to say expands on what the legendary Martin Diamond argued in the late 1960s and 1970s. As I'm sure you all know, Martin Diamond taught at a fine institution that was then called Claremont Men's College. So I think in this unique case, I may also legitimately appeal to authority. But now more seriously to the merits. First, was the Electoral College intended to be anti-democratic? A lot of people think that the founders intended it for independent electors to serve as this kind of check on the people. But this so-called faithless elector problem has never been a problem in all of American history, from the beginning. Not once did presidential electors ever thwart the will of the people. If it was intended to be anti-democratic in that way, it's certainly odd that it's never worked out that way. So what was the real reason that the founders created the Electoral College? We heard a bit of it in the introduction as a compromise among those who wanted a national vote versus those who wanted the states or Congress to be involved. That's one for sure. But there were also practical benefits, the most obvious of which is that the franchise, the elective franchise, was different in every state. In the northern states, there was already mostly universal white male suffrage, and in some northern states, I reclaim a minute of my time. And in some northern states, free black citizens could vote. In the South, the franchise was much more limited. How do you have a national popular vote for president when the proportion of each state's population that's eligible to vote differs from state to state? Right? How do you do it? The Electoral College is an obvious solution. Each state conducts its own election with however many few or many voters that it might have, but the total vote for president will always be in proportion to its population, plus 2, of course, for each senator, but we'll get to that. Okay, so really the Electoral College was an accommodation to practical necessities and was not intended to be anti-democratic. Okay, at least let's get that out there. Now, to be sure, those necessities are no longer relevant today. But might there be other practical benefits to the Electoral College that persist to this day? I think yes, which brings me to my second point. The most important practical benefit of keeping the Electoral College today is that it reduces the costs of error and fraud. Before I explain how it does so, I should add that got louder, human error certainly occurs, as it did in Milwaukee in 2020, which affected just a couple hundred votes. Really not so big of a deal. As does fraud, by the way. At least fraud used to occur routinely. Just read Tip O'Neill's memoirs. On almost every other page, he talks about how this or that local, state, federal, primary, or general election was stolen by Democratic Party machine for a period of some 70 years between 1900 and the 1970s. Now, to be sure, fraud occurs much less frequently today, largely because of stronger laws against it, stronger public pressure to investigate fraud, more mass media, stronger federal enforcement. But the reason fraud, at least historically, was so easy to perpetrate, and today why it still occurs in some elections, like judicial elections in Pennsylvania that were stolen, bought off recently that the DOJ has prosecuted, is because it's really not all that hard to commit fraud when election administrators, clerks, and judges all belong to the same political party and all belong to the same tight-knit group of political operatives. This is historically easier to do in big cities, by the way, with Democratic machine politics, but it's just as easy to do in the deepest of red areas too, where, again, there's no one to look over your shoulders. Okay. How does the Electoral College ameliorate the risks of error and fraud? The first way it does so is that the important races are always in what are, at that moment, swing states. And they are swing states largely because there are plenty of partisans of both political parties around. It's very hard to commit fraud, certainly wide-scale fraud, when the other side is constantly looking over your shoulder. Now, the second reason is that it will be the rare occasion when error or fraud occurs in a sufficient number of states to affect the Electoral College count. Sometimes it does, maybe in like 1960, when there was widespread fraud in Chicago and maybe Texas, maybe enough to have thrown the election to Nixon, but it's rare. Just think of the 2020 election. Even if there was fraud, and look, I'm sure there was some fraud somewhere, okay, because there always is, okay? The sheer scale of the fraud that would have been necessary for Trump to win in the multiple states that he needed to win is just unfathomable. There would have had to be so much fraud for Trump to be right that it's just totally implausible to think that so many people could perpetrate a fraud of that scale with no one noticing. Now imagine a national popular vote instead. Every single vote in every state, in every county, in every city, in every precinct now counts for the total. Every incident of human error, every single act of fraud now has the potential to tip a national election and a national recount. What a nightmare. Okay, but those are just the practical benefits. Surely I can do better than that, and I can. So let me tackle directly the false claim that the Electoral College is undemocratic. Not only is the Electoral College democratic, but has important features that make it worth preserving. One way in which the Electoral College, again, might be undemocratic is if faithless electors thwarted the national popular will, but again, that's never happened, so that's not the argument. The real argument seems to be that it's undemocratic for the winner of a national popular vote to lose the presidency. And that does happen every so often, like in 2000 and 2016. Before that, it wasn't until like 1888, okay? But does that really make our system undemocratic? What do we mean by democracy, by undemocratic? Is it undemocratic when the president has when the president was elected by the choice of 49.5% of the population? Would it be undemocratic if the president obtained the votes of 50% minus 1% of the population? Think of it from the other perspective. Would this make us monarchical? Clearly not. Would it make us oligarchic or an aristocracy? Clearly not. So we aren't talking here about true minority rule, rule by the few, rule by the one. Even a president who wins only by virtue of the Electoral College is still more or less democratically elected. Let me give you the example of 2016 to sharpen the point. Trump had about 63 million voters, Clinton 65.85 million voters. That's a big difference. But each of them had less than 50% of the total. If you give Trump the huge libertarian vote that year, and I'm excluding the Constitution Party and the Natural Law Party, which probably would have gone for him, if we give Clinton the Green Party votes, which I think is a rough cut of how a ranked choice voting system would go, then Trump could be said to represent 67.47 million voters, and Hillary Clinton 67.3. Was Trump's presidency really undemocratic? It's actually hard to say that with a straight face. Certainly, it was no less democratic than Bill Clinton's presidency. After all, Bill Clinton won in a landslide, 370 electoral votes, but only with 43% of the national vote. So he could only be said to represent 43% of the people. Would anyone seriously contend that Bill Clinton's presidency was more democratic than an Electoral College winner who loses the popular vote, but still has about 50% of that vote? Okay, now you might respond, these are all clever arguments, but it isn't as democratic as it could be, or should be. So again, let's unpack that. What makes a system democratic? Under the Electoral College, are elections free and fair? As Martin Diamond said, yes, they are, in the states. Does every person's vote count equally in the sense of one person, one vote? Yes, in the states. Do we have direct elections, that is, elections in which the people vote directly? Yes, we do, in the states. All the features that make elections democratic, we have, just in the states. So actually, there's nothing undemocratic at all about how we elect the president. The real complaint is that the president is not selected through one election, through a single national election, and is instead selected through a series of elections, one in each state. So to be clear, the Electoral College system is democratic. It just requires that the president win a series of democratic contests in a series of states. It's not enough for the president to win a single nationwide contest. She has to win multiple, nationally distributed, geographically distributed democratic contests. So the debate, to repeat the point ad nauseum, it's the whole point, if it's the only thing you remember, is not whether the Electoral College is democratic. It is. The debate is rather over whether a country like the United States should select the president through one national election or through an election that is partly national and partly federal. Which brings me to the very last thing I want to say. Is it good that the president doesn't just have to win millions of voters in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago? That is to become president with a claim to represent the entire nation, as Aditya said, administrator-in-chief, legislator-in-chief, commander-in-chief. Should that president also have to win votes in different regions of the country and win different cultures and different communities of interest? I guess the answer to that question depends on whether you favor federalism, which I do. See, maybe a majority of New Yorkers didn't vote for President X, but those New Yorkers can do all the crazy things that New Yorkers want to do just in New York. And maybe Texans didn't vote for President Y, and they could do all the crazy things that they do in Texas just in Texas. But if either wants their preferred policies to be enacted nationwide, well, they'd better get some support from the rest of the nation. That's what federalism does. It protects and maximizes local preferences. It protects minorities that might otherwise be oppressed by faraway majorities. And localism and minority rights have always been important features of American democracy. A democracy that is not democratic for its own sake, but rather for the sake of the common good of the people of this country. And so if localism and minority rights are still to be preferred, then so should be the Electoral College, which helps to secure and preserve them. Thank you.
Mr. Pai, your concluding arguments. And just as a reminder for the forum, your first minute and last minute will be protected, the middle 5. Mr. Wurman, you can interject.
Can, but need not. Start whenever.
Is my mic on, by the way? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to say this up front because Ilan can't interrupt me in the first minute. Half of what he said was wrong, and the other half was perfectly accurate and spectacularly irrelevant. So I'm going to start with what's irrelevant and then proceed to what's wrong. Mostly it was irrelevant. So the origins of the Electoral College, its history, especially its intellectual history, and I say this as someone with a master's degree in the subject from a place that's known for that subject, it's completely irrelevant. We should consider the arguments of the framers only insofar as they are compelling and right. We have absolutely zero obligation, moral, legal, constitutional, or political, to listen to anything that they have to say. I don't think I need to justify that. It's just known as the dead hand problem. So everything Ilan said in the first half of that speech, he could have easily just not said. The second thing, not undemocratic. Again, I don't disagree. And this is a key distinction, which maybe wasn't clear in my first speech. The question here is how egalitarian do we want the presidency to be, not how majoritarian we want it to be. Because you see, it already is, through the states, completely majoritarian. If you win a majority in California, you get all of California's electoral votes. If you win a majority in Ohio, you get all of Ohio's electoral votes. The question is, do we want it to be majoritarian through the medium of the states, or do we want it to be majoritarian in a pure way? And the reason I believe that it should be in a pure way is because I think directly representing the entire nation, being the president not of the states of America, but of the United States of America, is exactly what the presidency is about. A couple of statistics in that regard. Sinema and Manchin, who seem to control the federal legislative agenda. Sinema got 1,000,019 votes in 2018 out of 7 million Arizonans. That's 0.497% of the voting age population in America. So less than 0.5% of the voting age population, voting eligible, so even smaller, voted for Kristen Sinema, and yet she has an enormous clout. Joe Manchin got 290,510 votes in 2018. The population of West Virginia is 1.8 million. His vote share represents 0.1% of the voting eligible population in America. And yet these two senators have an effective veto on any legislation that could possibly pass at the federal level. Now, I'm not debating the United States Senate. We're leaving that alone. I'm just saying when West Virginia and Arizona are already so spectacularly well represented at the federal level, why do we need the President of the United States to also represent the states? We absolutely do not. It's just not what the presidency is for. So I'm not saying it's undemocratic to have the Electoral College.
I take the concession.
I'm just saying it's really stupid. The part that's not irrelevant, but just wrong, two things. Fraud. The advantage I have here is we actually know what it looks like to have the Electoral College, and I'll give you a couple examples. In 1960, we don't know this for sure, but there were voting irregularities in Chicago. There were claims, never fully debunked, never fully proved, that John F. Kennedy had help from the mafia in Chicago. Nixon thought he did. He didn't want to be a sore loser. He saved his powder for another day, which turned out to be the right decision, but we think that that might have happened. Bush v. Gore, hanging chads, Broward County. We know this story well. We don't know for sure that fraud happened there, but let's be honest. We're not really happy with how that election went. I don't think anybody in this room is happy with how that election went. That was a product of the Electoral College. Finally, and most importantly, January 6th. Kate Shaw has a great article in The Atlantic called The Other Cause of January 6th, which made a brilliant argument, which is that if it weren't for the Electoral College and Donald Trump being able to pick up the phone and call Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, who thankfully said no, and asked him to find a few votes in Georgia, if it weren't for that, if it weren't for the fact that constitutionally electors have absolutely...
Aditya, let me interrupt you there.
Sure, go ahead.
So who cares if he had, obviously people care about the Georgia thing, but he wouldn't have just had to win Georgia. He would have had to win Arizona, he would have had to carry Wisconsin, he would have had to carry multiple states, and isn't that exactly the virtue that I'm talking about?
Yeah, he would have had to commit moderate fraud instead of minor fraud, but it doesn't change the fact that the Electoral College actually makes it easier, not harder, to game the system. And Donald Trump is the greatest player of them all. I mean, he is like, so Chris Hayes has this great line, quoting Chekhov, that if there's a gun on stage in the first act, it has to go off in the third act. That's Chekhov, via Chris Hayes. If you leave loaded guns on the scenery of American democracy, sooner or later, someone's going to pick up that gun and they're going to shoot it.
It sounds to me as though Trump could not direct the outcome of this election through committing fraud without these intermediating state institutions getting on board, and it's the state institutions that stopped him. Isn't that what you've just described?
Well, the Electoral College is a state-mediated institution. So I actually
exactly. That prevented the fraud.
I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's true at all.
The fraud that Trump was trying to commit, right?
If it weren't for Mike Pence, Raffensperger, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, saying no, we would have been in a hell of a lot of trouble. And I'm not saying it's better than having your system. I'm just saying it's just not clear if it's better or worse. So it's just kind of a moot point. I just don't think the fraud argument holds any water. Finally, is it good?
It's last minute.
What's time? Last minute. Is it good? This is actually great because this goes to the purpose. Aristotle called it a telos. Lyndon Johnson, less educated, no less intelligent in my view, said it differently. What is the presidency for? And I think it's really good. I think it's really good for the reasons I've stated, for so many reasons and so many different points. There are 92 United States attorneys. There are 13 federal appellate courts. There are 94 judicial districts. There are 12 regional circuits, not state. So some region, there are regions. Ilan would know this well. He clerked for one. 670 federal district court judges, 93 United States. There's so many different people in our system who are already looking out for states' interests. We do not need the president of America doing the same. That's just not what the presidency is for.
Excellent. That is time. Mr. Wurman, I hand the mic off to you to begin.
Yeah, great. So I actually find myself agreeing with a lot of what Aditya said in his opening remarks. I just think that they support my argument. Right, so yeah, the president today, especially, well, let me go with, government, not, was that pres for president?
Yeah.
Okay, well, sorry. Yeah, we already have a numerous number of political safeguards of federalism. Not that many, by the way. The Electoral College is one. I think the U.S. Senate is another. Yeah, it's true. Most appointed officials like U.S. attorneys and district court judges are appointed in their states because presumably you want to live in the place where you're a judge, right? And that's good. That means that federal tax collectors and U.S. attorneys have some finger on the pulse of local preferences. That's all good. Again, because we like that kind of localism. But the only true safeguard, if you will, in the political system, other than the Electoral College, for federalism, is the United States Senate. Is the United States Senate, and it's true. It's true. I actually think it's probably a bigger safeguard, okay, than the Electoral College. But what I will say is the United States Congress does less and less and less every single year, and instead does what? It delegates more and more power to administrators, to the president. We now have an administrative state. As Aditya said, the president is the administrator-in-chief, and the administrator-in-chief gets to make coal policy and energy policy and climate policy and policy to that has widespread impact across the nation. So yeah, the presidency is even more important when it comes to legislating and administering. The president should be elected by a nationally distributed majority. Yes?
I'm going to interrupt you there just because I don't expect you to respond to all my arguments, but what's your response to my third argument, the Golden Bridge? Think about ethanol subsidies in Iowa and Pete Buttigieg and Barack Obama and how their careers were made in the primary system. If we already have primaries for the president going through the state, why do we also need the general?
Yeah. Well, so the one thing I'll say, of course, which is not the best argument to have, but in this case, not all systems, there is no perfect system. There's no perfect system. Are you telling me that in a system where we abolish the Electoral College and have a national popular vote, there isn't going to be a Senate that's 50-50, that's going to have tiebreakers, that you're going to have to buy off senators, you have to grease the wheel with pork? You're always going to have to do that. In any single system, you're going to have to do that. The Electoral College doesn't make a difference there. Maybe the Electoral College changes the distribution, who you have to buy off and with what you have to buy them off, but it's not going to change. Right? In a national system, you buy off Richard Daley in Chicago, which is what the Democrats did.
Yeah,
and when they did it,
related to that, you're just thinking about the rural states or the small states that will be ignored in a popular vote in your speech over there. What about Eastern California? 4.5 million people voted for Trump in California in 2016. Don't they deserve a voice? And wouldn't more people have voted for Trump if they knew that their vote would actually count? What about Houston? What about Austin? That's a liberal city, liberal bastion. I have a bunch of friends who are tech bros who moved there, and they didn't realize it's a political island. They live in a red state. It's a blue city, but it's a red state. What about upstate New York? Yeah. I mean, a popular vote, don't you think, actually enfranchises more people than it doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I'll say is this whole idea that the Electoral College requires that the votes in a state go all to the candidate of the majority vote, this winner-take-all system, that's not in the Constitution. That's not baked into the Electoral College. The states made that up. Right, in the 1830s due to party politics, right? And so we could get rid of that, and then we'd only have a small advantage to the rural states because they would just have the 2-point advantage because of the 2 for each Senate. But the winner-take-all system is not baked into the Electoral College, right? But I agree with Aditya. I do care about the people in Eastern California or Austin, Texas, which is why I believe in federalism and localism all the way down. I believe in local control of education. Right? I believe if the red meat people in Eastern California want to do, I don't know what anti-CRT is, fine, let them do that. And if LA wants to do CRT in schools, let LA do CRT in schools. Decentralize everything. Like bring power back to where it's closest and most important to the people. The higher you go up from local to state to national, okay, the policies of a small minority now risk impacting a vast number of people who share different ideas and different political preferences. So I say, I embrace Aditya's point. Take the Electoral College system and devolve power to all the states. I'm going to say something very controversial, and I will deny that I said it, notwithstanding the camera. I'll say that it's a deep fake, if anyone ever puts me. I'm okay even getting rid of one person, one vote, sort of, academically, theoretically speaking, for the second chamber of a state legislature. So that rural interests in California can be more represented. Before San Francisco and LA wanted to impose something on a totally different culture in Fresno or Stockton or, I don't know, I used to live in this state and used to know these cities, right? They should maybe, get their buy-in, right? Otherwise, let Stockton be Stockton and Fresno be Fresno and Bakersfield, continue to be the road to Vegas or whatever, okay? But that's the whole point. That's the whole advantage. Now, Aditya is right. There's a risk here. There's a risk here, which is the veto gates. It does give some minority in various states power to veto legislation of truly national scope that might benefit the entire nation, that many people want, but Iowa doesn't want because they like their corn subsidies or whatever. That's true. That's true. I don't support that. I don't support that. That is a feature of the electoral system. But again, no system is perfect. And this one's pretty darn good. It's worked pretty darn well for 230-some years. Are we really going to abandon it on false hopes and dreams and aspirations that maybe some other system will be better? And I just don't see it. I'm sure I had other things to say. I'll say one more thing in my last minute. Swing states. 2 points about swing states. Never forget that swing states change. They change over time. Okay, did you know that California and New York used to be swing states? Okay, sure, it was like 40 years ago or 30 years ago. But still, they used to be swing states. Ohio, Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina. Could you have anticipated what happened in 2020 based on 2012? Like, these change. And by the way, the 5 smallest states, I should add this, the 10 smallest states jurisdiction, if you include DC, half of them vote blue, half of them vote red. So there isn't an obvious partisan preference to this, right? So behind a veil of ignorance, this system looks pretty darn good to protect and secure those things that American democracy has always been about, which isn't just pure majoritarian rule, but also minority rights and localism. And that's why I think for something that's worked that well for that purpose for 230 years, it's probably worth maintaining.
That is time. And for the record, I think you both should have gone to theater instead of law, but that's just my 2 cents. I hope everyone give our 2 debaters a big round of applause. And I recently graduated. I know how these things go. Some of you in the back are going to make a beeline for the door, but before you do that, I please beg that you fill out the QR code so we can see this final vote. You know who you are.
And we have time for audience Q&A, right, after?
Yes.
Plus you were going to maybe, but
You're going to ask us a question, too.
Move your hand.
Oh. Sorry, John.
Is it the same question?
No.
I swear, Aditya, you have the uphill battle here because you have a high margin.
That's true.
If your margin goes up, then I'm really embarrassed. I do admit that.
All right, so as the votes are trickling in and we see the results on screen soon, I'm going to quickly introduce what the Q&A portion is going to be. We have 2 mics over here. Please line up at each of them. Come and ask your question. As you do, make sure to introduce yourself, say your name and your class and your major. Also, please be brief. Keep it a question, not a speech, and also 1 question per person. If you want to ask follow-ups, you have to get back in line. All right, are we ready to start with the Q&A, or do we want to see the results first? Okay. Do we want to do the Q&A and then we can assess? All right. Sounds good.
Hi, my name is Tara. I'm a senior at Claremont McKenna studying. Studying
Yeah, I
PPE.
saw the results. You may as well put them up. Sorry.
All right. Sorry, Tara.
Okay.
You're a dear friend, but we're going to cut you off.
Not a single person budged.
Wow.
Incredible.
Wow.
Absolutely incredible.
Is it literally identical?
Was it a decimal off, or what was it? Did I convince 1 person? I convinced 1 person. Really? 2 people. Okay.
Oh, nice.
My work here is
He's
done.
a libertarian. It doesn't count.
Oh, my goodness. Whose classes are you taking here? Gone are the days of Martin Diamond, I see. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay. I'm a PPE and government dual major, and I was going to ask, particularly directed to Mr. Pai. In 2000, we saw the influences of a recount of Florida. That was a very big deal. What would a recount look like in the event of a popular vote? Would it be a national recount? And what would the logistical impacts have on the overall influence in how America looks to other nations in the world if it takes perhaps a significant amount of time to do such a recount? So I'm kind of curious, to Professor Wurman's point about practicality, what that would look like in such an event and the depiction of America on the national stage?
It would look really bad. I think it would damage our standing as, the leader of the free world. I think where I come out is it's not clear to me that it would be worse than the current system. It's interesting that the Bush v. Gore thing, Scalia had a famous concurrence in that case. It's a per curiam opinion. The court basically ruled unanimously. But in his concurrence, he noted, so the electors in Florida were actually threatening to kind of just do their own thing because the Florida Supreme Court was controlled by Democrats. And they didn't like the direction it was going. So they just said, hey, we're just going to kind of award these votes to Bush because we can do that. And Scalia noted very clearly that actually the Constitution doesn't say anything about that. And if they want to do that, they can't. That's really scary. Now, depending on how you design a straight popular vote, it could be just as bad. I don't know. I think it depends on the proposal. But it really does worry me that the electors have absolutely no obligation to follow the dictates of the popular vote winner in their state. And if that were ever to come to a head, I think it'd be really embarrassing for us.
Can I clear the air about something? So actually, I agree, by the way, about the whole origins point, and then I'll talk about Bush v. Gore. There are certain things that people just associate with the Electoral College, and I was just trying to clear the underbrush, right? I mean, people do make an argument, well, the founders, it must be bad, or so origins do sort of matter. And yeah, if Bush v. Gore is a feature of the Electoral College, which something like that could happen. But I was a student here at the Athenaeum when Justice Scalia came to speak to us. And as he liked to tell the audience, Bush v. Gore was actually 7-2. Get over it. Right? That's what he said. And it was, by the way, 7-2. Right? It was a 7-2 decision saying that the way Florida was proposing to recount the votes violated the Equal Protection Clause. What was 5-4 was the remedy, where the 5 conservative justices says you guys haven't come up in advance of the election with the method to do these recounts in a way that doesn't violate the Equal Protection Clause, so you have to stop counting.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not saying that it was a right decision, but it is certainly not as implausible and crazy as people think. And then, now you can check me on this because maybe my knowledge is out of date, but did you know that a bunch of fancy newspapers like the New York Times put millions and millions of dollars into doing a full recount in Florida over the next 3 or 4 years? And they found that Bush would have won Florida anyway, the popular vote. Okay, now there's but what about the convicted felons that should have been able, fine, but those are the rules set in advance. But under the rules that existed, Bush would have won. Admittedly by 12 votes. But at least thank goodness that the Electoral College victory would then be much more dispositive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this debate. It was really entertaining and educational. I very much enjoyed it. My name is Melanie Kalla. I'm a sophomore here at CMC, and I'm studying international relations. My question is also for you, Mr. Pai. So when it comes to debates about abolishing any institution, you often have to prove why abolishing is better than reforming. So winner takes all was mentioned, and I'm curious, if you remove winner takes all, and you have better representation within the states to represent people, like you said, perhaps maybe the Trump voters here in California, do you think it is still strong enough argument to completely abolish the Electoral College?
That's a great question. I haven't thought about that, actually. I mean, it's interesting. Maine actually does it by congressional district, right? That's worth considering, I think. Divides it up a little bit more. Yeah, winner take all. It's interesting. This kind of it kind of messes with my case a little bit because, I thought the whole literature on Electoral College was super fuzzy and not very well thought out. And one of the really fuzzy kind of missed distinctions, I thought, was this really isn't about majoritarianism. Unless you talk about winner take all and all of that, then yeah, it becomes about majoritarianism. This is about egalitarianism because within Florida or within California, it's still majority rules, right? And it's winner take all, majority rules. And a lot of the literature really just talks about, well, democracy is majority rules, and there's argument about democracy versus republicanism, and it's that's not what it's about. So I actually think your question kind of identifies the real pain point here, which is these other things surrounding the Electoral College. So one of the questions is, did we choose the wrong topic? Are we focused on the wrong aspect of what's malfunctioning here? That's beyond my pay grade for this speaking engagement. But I think you're raising a really good question, which is, Well, if what we really care about is, let's say you take my premise that what we really care about is the teleological argument, meaning telos, meaning purpose of the presidency. What is the presidency for? Well, should we really be focusing on the Electoral College, or should we be trying to look at these other avenues of reform? I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, my response to kind of the respect for the framers thing that Ilan keeps bringing up is, I really respect the framers. I think they're brilliant. I think they put together a system that's extraordinarily well designed. I just think that they also left as an amendment process. And so, although we should take their views seriously, we shouldn't be bound by them. And I think you're raising the question of where to focus. I think if I interpret your question, I think it's a really good point.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ryan. I'm a sophomore here at CMC studying public policy and IR. And Professor Wurman, my question was for you. So I think you got at this a little bit at the end talking about swing states, but I was interested when you said at the beginning about how it should be important for presidential candidates not only to have to campaign in New York and California, but in all the smaller states in between. But I think we've seen, especially more recently, with a small number of swing states determining the entire election and presidential candidates spending the vast majority of their campaign in those states and only those states. And as a voter, I think maybe the argument that my parents or even my grandparents might have got to get swooned by presidential candidates because California was a swing state back then doesn't necessarily apply to me now. So in terms of how it's possible for a lot of perspectives in a lot of states to be shut out of the conversation when only a small number of swing states really matter in the Electoral College, I was wondering what your opinion on that would be.
Look, it's a good point, and it's the point that people most, I would say, bring up here. But the reality, nevertheless, is the same, which is swing states do vary. Arizona, where I teach and live now, who would have thought that it was a swing state, 4 years ago, 10 years ago? It's now a swing state. Yeah, they used to elect Democrats, before the big sort, when some Democrats were still conservative in a way, right? But who would have thought that, right? Again, think about North Carolina. And so it's like these states, or Virginia, really, I should say, states change, right? And the fact that California has become so monolithic and homogenous that it feels left out of the presidential process, I have no love lost for them. Okay? Because you know what? With their supermajority in both chambers of their state legislature, they could do all the crazy things that they want to do in California, right? It's just when they want to be involved in the political process nationally and have their monolithic liberal ideology imposed on the rest of the country, by the way, same thing with Texas or wherever you are, right? Then I don't care that you have 10 million more people than Wisconsin or Wyoming. I don't know, people live in Wyoming, right? There are a few people there, okay? I don't care. I don't care, right? Because you could do what you want to do in California. But as soon as you take control of the national reins of power, what hope does Wyoming have when California wants to ban hunting rifles? And so I don't lose sleep over it. Let me put it this way to you, young man. There are better things to lose sleep over than the swing state problem. Thank you.
Before the next question, excuse me, would it be possible to generate the second graphic? There should have been 2 questions.
There's a third question.
The third question, which of course, though it looks like a statistical improbability, that an identical number of people change their mind and the votes simply happen to align at the identical percentages. But one of the things we're very much interested in, the 3 of us in conjunction with the Dry Roundtable, was if people were open to changing their mind. So I wanted to pull up those results briefly so we could discuss them.
You have to vote, though, right? Nohl's got to move his head.
Yes. So the question that is being asked is, are you more open to the opposing argument than you were before? And judging by the results, probably a philosophical question.
Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes 4 years of a liberal arts education to really start shifting the ground.
Or a good law professor.
Hello? Sorry, my name is Annika.
Yes.
I study math and literature at CMC. I'm a senior, and my question is addressed to both of you. So for Halloween in high school, my history professor dressed as a dinosaur and claimed that he was the Electoral College, which I thought was hilarious. And
That's funny.
my question, I guess, is that not only do elections and the way they're run vary state by state, but they also vary decade by decade and year by year. So I think many of us would argue that the way that elections are run in the United States could be done a lot better. I guess an example would be blockchain. And
I don't
would
really
like
know
to
what blockchain is, so I can resist as the old person up here. Okay.
My question is that with technology and with the ways that we can change elections and make them better, less vulnerable to fraud across the board, how does that change your arguments, and how does that change the way that your feeling towards the electoral college goes?
I'll take this one first because my answer is very quick. And I say this as someone who has a lot of friends in tech and has spent some time in San Francisco. I think we should do paper ballots. I actually think technology makes us vulnerable not only to domestic fraud, but what I worry more about is, especially given the state, sadly, of STEM education in this country, being vulnerable to national security threats. So I think we should, I literally have my passwords written on a piece of paper that I keep in my bag, which is in the office over there. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Don't rob me, whoever's listening. But it's not, it's a real thing. That is actually the most secure way to do an election until we find some foolproof way to prevent cyber attack, which we never will. It's an endless arms race. And so I actually would reverse your question and say we probably use more technology than we should.
And I'll just add that the Electoral College is remarkably adaptable, actually, and versatile, right? I mean, the Electoral College, again, didn't require this winner-take-all system. And we could go back to a not winner-take-all system, right? And that way, federalism is still safeguarded, but just a little bit, right? The Electoral College vote total will be closer to the national vote proportion, right? So it can do that. A state can have ranked choice voting. The Electoral College doesn't prevent a ranked choice voting system, right? And then, I hate to break it to all of you, but George H.W. Bush would have been president a second term, right? Because all the votes that went to Ross Perot then would have been divided up and George H.W. Bush would have won. But at least we wouldn't have had a president that only reflected 43% of the national popular. That's one way to do it. The Constitution specifically allows each state to appoint the electors according to the processes established by the legislature, right, of the state. So it's adaptable, and if they want to run an election through whatever that word is you said, blockchain, which people have tried to explain it to me, and I'm just too old, okay? Yeah. I guess they could do it. Whether it's a good idea, I don't know, right? But they could do it. The Electoral College is very adaptable.
I actually agree with that a lot. And just to build on what Ilan said, looking around the Electoral College to see what reforms are possible, one of the really overlooked things, I think, like oddly overlooked in this debate, is presidential primaries. I mean, America is pretty unique in how much we rely on people to select presidential party nominees or head of state nominees. I mean, look at the UK. It's the party decides, right? And in a lot of countries, it's the party decides. And here, someone like a Barack Obama or a Pete Buttigieg, who is not the party favorite, can do well and even win a nominating contest. And I'm surprised that more people are not talking about that with respect to the Electoral College, because, as I argued, in my view, that's actually what convinced me. I was neutral when I started researching this, and once I started looking at the primary system and the nominating process of both major parties and realized the presidents have to go kiss the rings in Iowa and in all these states in New Hampshire no matter what. And so do we really need to make them do it again in the general? That's kind of a similar point as a ranked choice voting or a winner-take-all or first past the post or these other features that are kind of peripheral to Electoral College but actually profoundly affect how it operates.
Would a smoke-filled room have produced Donald Trump?
Exactly.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Right?
Doesn't smoke.
That's good.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see the results before the last two questions. Oh, good. Okay, nice. So that would be the 2/3 that supported Aditya are now open to my view, and the 1/3 that supported me are fixed.
This is great for lawyers.
That's how I'm going to interpret the data.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong. Fight me.
This is perfect for lawyers because we can just interpret it however we want and just keep arguing.
Some interpretations are better than others. But very interesting. Very interesting. I'm gratified.
What up, guys? Sorry. I was just going to say I was someone who was open to changing my mind. This bleeds into my question. My name is My name is Nathan Verba. I'm a sophomore at CMC studying cognitive science. My question is for Ilan, and you can guys open it up. I thought the one point that I was most intrigued by was the whole idea of like a distributed democratic system where you have multiple democratic kind of processes happening in conjunction. The one thing that, and I think Aditya kind of begged this question maybe indirectly, thinking about egalitarianism, that what that creates is in 2020, you have a vote in Wyoming worth, 3.5 votes more than a vote in California. I was surprised like a statistic like that didn't come up, but
I was glad it didn't.
you did say you were willing to accept, possibly not a one person per one vote thing. I guess it's a two-part question where is 1 to 3.5 too far for you? A, and B, if it is too far, what possible reformations would you be willing to accept that could lessen that disparity?
Yeah, no. Okay, tough question and a good question. And I'll just do this and answer it sort of by analogy. Okay, suppose the European Union became the United States of Europe or whatever. Okay, where they granted more authorities to the European Union, had direct coercive authority, didn't just operate sort of through the other governments, kind of like the United States, but each state is still much more, is much different from each other, a lot of different cultures. Okay. If 90% of the French and 90% of the Germans voted together in one way to make a 50% plus one, their candidate win for this election to the President of the United States of Europe, okay? Do we really care if Hungary or Poland or Switzerland or some other country can block it because France and Germany only get X number of electoral votes, right? Because France and Germany can always do things in France and Germany. But the second they want to do something in dramatically different cultures, historically sovereign polities, right, like Poland or Lithuania or wherever, or Turkey, right, you're going to have to get them on board. It's not enough to win one European-wide election. You're going to have to win multiple elections in multiple European states. That seems obviously the right way to do it in that circumstance. Why is it less obvious in the United States? Well, because we aren't as fractured as Europe, right? Because we're historically truly one nation with different states, right? So we are something in between just being France and being Europe. We're something in between. And the question is, does the Electoral College capture the spirit of that thing that we are? That's in between one nation like France and a confederation like Europe. That's what federalism originally meant, right? We are partly national and partly federal or confederal, right? We're a mix of the two. And I think the Electoral College largely strikes the right balance.
Your point about egalitarianism, just want to share a quick stat. A Montanan has twice the clout, a multiple of 2.14 as a Californian in electing the president. So I think it's...
They don't take their guns away.
It's really not about majoritarianism at all, in my view. It's about egalitarianism. Why are Montanans better at selecting presidents than Californians? And this is, they're
not better. They're not better. They just want to make sure you don't take their guns away.
And if we want to go back to the founding, like Ilan, James Wilson is probably the most important founder that most people have never heard of. He's a Scottish immigrant, and he made this argument. Not only was he studied the Scottish Enlightenment, he actually studied with those people. He studied with Adam Smith and Hutchison and all these guys. And what he got from that, he immigrated to the United States and became a lawyer here, was equal dignity, equal human dignity. That's the main value he derived from that. And he was at the Constitutional Convention. And he actually, oddly, proposed the college as kind of a compromise. but didn't want to do it for precisely this reason, which is that there's absolutely nothing fair. I would say it's actually un-American, because not just one person, one vote, but just political equality. No matter how much money you have, or how good looking you are, how smart you are, or who your daddy is, the idea in this country is we are all political equals. We may not be equals on every dimension, but in politics, we're all supposed to matter just as much. And the Electoral College, I think, in my view, just it flies in the face of that. You know, that's what I think. It's actually a mistake. It was a mistake the founders kind of had to do. They were in a rush. They're trying to get it done. But they left us an amendment process, and I think we owe it to them, actually, to amend it.
Really quickly, this will be the last question of the night.
So, Mr. Pai, this is really directed to sort of your idea of the primaries still giving a right to individual states and sort of like the demands of individual people within those states. So, you know, the majority of states have closed party primaries, right? So wouldn't you, like, if we're worried about each state's power, I feel as though making it, still saying, oh, look, the states will all have their power through the primaries is even worse, because now you've only got half of each state getting to decide sort of that presidential process. Don't you think that that's sort of, like, also terrible?
Yeah, it is worse. I was just kind of using it opportunistically to try to win. But yeah, the logic applies there too, no question. And just a little anecdote, I went to CMC with two friends who were both Iowans and both met Barack Obama. I volunteered on Obama's campaign in Orange County. I have never so much as seen the man, you know, in real life. I mean, not even from afar. And that tells you something. I mean, that tells you something about the primary system and how much clout states already have. So yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. It's not good.
Thank you.
Since we're out of time, I'll just say one thing in conclusion, which is that I did not recall until today that Aditya and I had debated 10 years ago when I was a senior and he was a freshman, which means I must have blacked out afterward. And I suppose as a lawyer, I think precedent matters, and that established a precedent. So you should all go out and enjoy your Thursday. Am I giving bad advice? Am I giving bad advice? No. I'm going to get in trouble. So thank you.
Thank you for the amazing debate, as well as the very applicable and succinct send-off. I think we can all say that was a grudge match worth waiting for. I'm glad we got to have it here and the subsequent reconciliation afterwards. Thank you all so much for coming to the Athenaeum today on your last day before fall break. We all hope to see you here again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Watch out for grudge match 3.
Thanks for being a good, sensible type.
Sir. Yep, no, thank you.
No, that was really